Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about how to draw fantasy horns. As you can see right here, these are all the different types that we're going to be going over today. So first off, we are going to be looking at how to draw what I'm calling a dragon horn, a pretty classic fantasy horn shape. This is one of the easiest ones to do, honestly. There's not much to it other than the texture. The shape is pretty simple. Two curved lines, and you can mess around with it as much as you'd like. It's pretty hard to get this part wrong. The part that's a little bit harder for this is getting the exact right texture. Now, of course, you don't have to go for a more complicated texture. You can go for a smoother horn if you so desire. I personally prefer the look of a little bit more rough and jagged dragon horn, so that's why I've gone with this right here. As you can see, I added an extra line in it to kind of flatten out the shape to make it not too round. And then I start just drawing the individual segments of the horn. I don't want to use two straight lines for this. In fact, I don't want to use one line to achieve the texture of the segment. In fact, I want a lot of really small lines, using jagged, kind of sketchy strokes. You can see as I zoom in, I'm not even going straight across. At certain points, I'm going at the same angle as the curve of the horn, just to get a very pointed shape. Part of the reason for this is because whenever I've tried drawing a horn, a fantasy horn, and I've tried to go for more smoother texture, it just looks wrong. I'll show you in a bit how to make it look a little better, but when you just go straight across with circles, something about it looks off. But even just adding a little bit of texture, it makes it significantly better, although not perfect. I still prefer starting out with the jagged texture than adding the texture later. If you do want to go for a smoother look, I'll do a different shape horn here. I guess kind of a minotaur shape, or Viking helmet sort of thing. I draw the shape, and then I draw a couple more lines, again just adding texture. I'm trying to flatten that out. The impression that I'm trying to give is that the outside of the horn is rather curved, and the inside is kind of flat sloping, not just a rounded shape. For the actual suggestion of the curvature of the horn, if you want a smoother shape, instead of drawing a circle all the way around like I did for the horn that I drew previously, you only want to draw part of the line. You only want to go part way. Now, you still want to imagine that that line is going all the way around the horn, otherwise you might get the wrong angle. Next on to the demon horn. The thing I did right there was a quick art hack that you can use, which if there's a shape of something that you like, if you trace over the whole thing, the lines get mixed up with the other one, and it can be hard to tell where you've drawn and where you haven't, and I find that tracing directly often leads to a poorer product overall. But if you really like the shape and you're not confident in your ability to get that shape, if you just trace the curvature of the shape first, and then later add the full dimension to it, you'll get a better result. And again, like before, I don't want a smooth line, I want very sketchy lines to imply the texture. Another thing that you want to note here is when you have these big curved shapes, you can't have them be perfectly straight, you have to have them angle. If you look at them, it's not a rectangle shape, it's more of a triangular shape. The inside of that curve is going to be a lot smaller than the outside of that curve. Once you get into the part that's not as curved, then it doesn't matter as much. It does become a rectangle. But then once it goes back to the other curve, you're going to see that it goes in the opposite direction. Still with the inside of the curve being smaller than the outside, but it's opposite on the horn itself. Now on to moose antlers. Now, I actually struggled with this one a bit in the video itself. The one that I drew before the video, just for reference, was actually, I think I did a pretty good job with it. The one in the video, same as before, I was rushing it a little bit to try to do it for the video, and it didn't turn out quite as well. It turned out fine, but it took me a longer amount of time to fix the mistakes that I'd made than if I just spent a lot of time in the beginning laying the proper groundwork to get a good result. So don't skip step one. I kind of skipped step one. You'll see me go back later and show you what step one is, but for now, I'll show you what I did and the mistakes that I made along the way, so you can learn from me. So as you see with this moose horn, there are two basic shapes that you have. You have the front bit that goes just straight sideways, and you have the really large part of the horn, or the antler rather, that goes backwards. It's important to get the proper shape for the one in the back. The one in the front doesn't matter as much. It's more about the fact that it's adding dimension to the antler overall. The mistake I made here was making the antler too big. It's a lot thicker on the right side than it is on the left. And if I'd been paying more attention and if I hadn't been rushing it, I would have noticed this. It's not that I'm ending up with a bad product overall, it's more that it doesn't perfectly match the one on the left. Now, granted, if I wanted it to be a one-to-one match, like a perfect match, I could have just copied the layer and then mirrored it, and that would have achieved the same thing. But I wanted a more organic feel. I wanted them to be slightly different, which is why I would always choose to draw them both myself instead of drawing one of them and then mirroring it later. As you can see, again, I messed this up. I made it too thick. And in fact, even though I was fixing it later, I didn't make it thin enough even towards the top. You can see there's a very big angle difference between the two sides. That's one thing I would recommend paying attention to whenever you're doing a moose antler in particular, is pay attention to the dimension and the angles, because that's what makes these two look as different as they do. Again, I didn't end up with a bad product, simply that it wasn't as good as it could have been. Now, going back just a bit, I want to show you what I should have done and what you should do. And that is by laying out a little bit of groundwork, some framework for yourself to build off of to get a good result. Like I said earlier, when you draw the first one, these triangle shapes, just to get the shape that you want and to get the size and dimensions for the antler that you want. You don't need this exact angle, you don't need these exact shapes to build a moose antler, but if you get roughly triangular shapes in this order, you can easily build a moose antler off of that. And instead of mirroring the moose antler itself, if you take the framework and mirror that and then draw over that on the other side, you're going to get a result that is the same rough dimensions but looks slightly different and so is more organic. Another thing you can use if you find it more helpful than using triangles is you can use an oval and just build the spikes off of that, but I personally find the triangle more helpful. Another thing you want to pay attention to when doing the different sides is note what the angle of the peaks of each part of the antler is in relation to each other, and that's another thing that can make it look off between two. Again, it's more that it looks slightly different, but if you pay attention to all these lines, then you're less likely to run into that problem. Alright, now on to elk antlers. Honestly, this was a really simple one to do. The basic shape is, if you look past all the extremities, it's kind of like a wine glass shape. It's not quite the S shape that we've looked at earlier. You have just a wine glass, and then off to one side, looking at the one on the left that I'm drawing right now, the first two are quite rounded. Honestly, you could probably take the ellipse shape and draw a circle and just erase part of it, and whatever's left is that shape right there. The third one, the largest of the offshoots off to the left, is quite straight right up until the very end where it just curves slightly. So it's two part circles and then one straight line that curves slightly at the end. As to the part that's off to the right side, again, it's similar to the third one on the left. It's pretty straight with a little curve towards the end. And then I have just a tiny little offshoot off of the one on the right. That's a pretty sharp curve, and I'm going to make it sharper later. Now this one I went a little too rough with. I made the lines very jagged, and I later had to go back and fix it. But that is the beauty of these, is that you can fix it and you'd never notice. If I was doing this for an actual drawing, I would go over this again for some cleaner line work. As it was, that was the shape that I wanted, so I was fine leaving it there. But if I were to do it in an artwork, instead of trying to clean it up more, I would just go over it on another layer to get a cleaner one from the beginning. Now on to deer antlers. Deer antlers and elk antlers are... you might think that they're similar, but they're actually quite different. Elk antlers go more straight back, and deer antlers are a lot more off to the side. And the way that I drew this one in particular was, instead of starting with that wine glass shape like I did with the elks, I wanted to start off with going off to the side, because that's the main part of the antler, and everything else builds off of that. So you go off to the side in what's closer to a margarita glass shape almost? I don't exactly know how to describe that shape, but looking at it, it is curved, but the framework for it is not curved. It's two straight lines, not quite 90 degrees, but you have the one line going straight out, and then one line going practically straight up. I'm cleaning this one up quite a bit because I started off pretty messy. And like I said, with the elk one, if I were to be using this for an artwork, I would use another layer and I would turn down the opacity on this one and draw over it just to get a cleaner line work. Still leaving it kind of sketchy just for the nice texture, but a lot cleaner than this overall. In this case, it wasn't worth the time, so I just erased the messiest lines and touched it back up with the pencil brush. And that is it for this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, please leave a like, a comment, and if you want to see more of this, please subscribe. I've got plenty of ideas for the future. Alright, I'll see you next time. Adios.